By this point, it seemed that every new life milestone brought me a new Zelda game to play. There was no exception to the rule this time. I was on the cusp of high school when Twilight Princess came out, and with the release of Skyward Sword, I was already in my first year of university. It was a perfectly timed release too. The game was released on the Sunday before the Thanksgiving break, which meant that I had plenty of time to enjoy a new adventure. I remember driving down to GameStop to pick up my pre-order. I had a bit of income now, so I decided to splurge and get the limited edition. The limited edition came with a golden Wiimote and a collection of orchestrated music that remains on my iPod to this day. Sitting there listening to the Zelda soundtrack with a golden Wiimote in my hand, I began my next Zelda adventure. Skyward Sword was a Zelda game that was different from the norm. The first noticeable difference involved the control scheme. The motion controls used the Wiimote to its full capability. Some people have mixed reactions to the combat, but I loved it. The motion controls made every encounter much more interesting. Even common enemies took a bit of strategy to vanquish. There was also the introduction of a stamina gauge, which allowed for a variety of actions such as sprinting. This resulted in a game that was absolutely thrilling to control. To be honest, it felt pretty badass once you knew what you were doing. The next major difference involved the presentation of the overworld. Rather than being a gigantic map, the overworld was split into chunks. This had a variety of effects. The open world nature that typically characterized a Zelda game was relatively limited to Skyloft. Flying around on the Loftwing in the sky was interesting at first, but the world felt empty after a bit. The overworld split had a mixed effect as well. The ground was disconnected, and this limited the depth of the areas. The trade-off was that the areas leading up to the dungeon became part of the dungeon themselves in a sense. Often it was necessary to solve puzzles in order to simply traverse the terrain. Being quite a bit older, I enjoyed this integrated puzzle solving immensely. The puzzles were a bit easy, but I enjoyed the adventure of simply reaching the dungeons. As for the dungeons themselves, they were mostly great. The Ancient Cistern stands as one of the best Zelda dungeons of all time, with a boss that could be called one of the best Zelda bosses as well. A couple of dungeons even used a mechanic that I can only categorize as brilliant. The use of time-shifting stones in the Leneru mining facility and the sand ship posed some of the most devilish puzzles in the game. For a game that loved to hold the player's hand, these dungeons were excellent because they were actually difficult. Contextualizing and testing the effects of the time stones created a sense of difficulty that slowed down my blistering pace through the game. I love Skyward Sword, but the game had a few problems. It was way too easy. I don't know if that was a result of me being a Zelda veteran, being in my early 20s, or if it was just the current trend of the games to be more accessible. Whatever it was, the game was laughably easy. There was also a certain boss battle that was reused 3 times throughout the game. A younger version of me would have relished the opportunity for more battles, but at my current age, it was just annoying. Despite my grievances, Skyward Sword was a landmark game in terms of an aspect that had remained relatively basic in the Zelda series. As the progenitor of the entire series, the story of Skyward Sword remains my favorite Zelda story to date. The story marks the first in the timeline. The Hylians live in the sky after the goddess Hylia sealed a great evil on the surface. Link is a knight in training that is living a tranquil life in Skyloft. Zelda is the daughter of the chief of the village and shares a close relationship with Link as well. After celebrating Link's exam, Zelda is kidnapped by a tornado. Link draws the goddess sword and ascends to the surface to find Zelda. This initial setup is perfect. Link and Zelda's relationship comes across as close and genuine. This was the first Zelda game to set up such an emotional story from the start. My favorite part of the story is its escalation. What starts as a simple quest to save Zelda turns into an overarching quest to save the world. The lore implications of this game are also a highlight. Zelda is revealed to be a mortal reincarnation of the goddess Hylia. Link is tasked with forging the goddess sword into the true blade of evil's bane, the Master Sword. Even the villain has long-lasting implications in the series, which explains why Ganondorf, Link, and Zelda are locked in an almost eternal struggle against each other. On his defeat, the main villain Demise cast a curse on Link and Zelda's descendants. Throughout the ages, Demise's rage will always haunt the pair's descendants, but despite this, Link and Zelda stay on the surface and create the Kingdom of Hyrule. This story just worked for me at the time, and it still does. I played this game at a very tumultuous time in my life. My girlfriend at the time was out of state at college, and it was difficult to keep in contact with each other at times. The emotional payoff of the story managed to hit me at the perfect time. Seeing Link's attempt to reunite with Zelda had a profound impact on me. It remains my favorite Zelda story of all time and really showcased just what Nintendo was capable of in terms of story. Most importantly, it was something that made me excited for the future. At the time, I thought that if Nintendo continued down this route, it could lead to something game-changing for the series. Given that a new Zelda game is weeks away by this point, it seems that the already evolved story of Skyward Sword was not only the beginning of the actual timeline, but the progenitor of the more involved Zelda story going forward. For this reason alone, Skyward Sword should be lauded. Despite some minor flaws and design choices, I love Skyward Sword. My love of the game actually got me to start my first Let's Play series. Probably not a good idea to start at a Let's Play series of a game that was decently long, but like all Zelda games, every one of them is a masterpiece. Not everyone would agree with me. It seems that the larger Zelda fanbase has an intense dislike of the most recent game to release after initial honeymoon period. Right now, Skyward Sword is in that dubious position in terms of 3D Zeldas. The same thing always happens though. The newest game is released, everyone goes on to criticizing that one for a bit, and then everyone seems to find a newfound love for the game that was bashed constantly. At the end of the day though, every one of these Zelda games is absolutely worth playing, and despite some criticism, Skyward Sword maintains the high quality that the series is known for. With that said, that covers my experiences with every 3D Zelda game that has currently been released, but I am not done just yet. The final installment of this retrospective will look into my hype for the newest entry into the Zelda series. I'll be back soon with a look into my experiences waiting for Breath of the Wild, and also to talk about why this game release means so much to me. As always, thanks for checking this video out.